Welcome to the Private Practice Survival Guide podcast with your host, Brandon Seigel. I'm a published author, speaker, entrepreneur, and private practice strategist dedicated to transforming the way that healthcare functions. This podcast is all about empowering you to create the change you want to see. Let's dive in. Welcome back to the Private Practice Survival Guide podcast. You are in for a treat in this episode. So in this episode, I'm bringing in the great Scott Booher, Chief HR Officer, HR consultant, works with me at WellnessWorks Management Partners. Today, we're going to be talking about building an HR foundation and the must-have policies for private practice owners like you. So first and foremost, Scott, welcome to the pod. Let me know, why don't you share with everyone quickly your background and how we started working together, just so everyone gets to know you.
Yeah, no, thanks, Brandon. Happy to join you here. So I've been working in the healthcare industry for now over 30 years and in HR for over 20 years. Got to start working with you over 12 years ago at Every Child Achieves. You hired me on as your HR director. And just been working with therapy companies, therapists for the last 12 years. And prior to that, I was working for nursing, LVNs, RNs across the country for 19 years. So definitely been in the healthcare field for a long time, and just HR almost as long as that.
Yep. And for those who don't know, you should by now, but just so you know, we do fractional HR. That's one of the services that WellnessWorks Management Partners provides. And so, Scott, I'll ask it to you. How would you define what fractional HR is and kind of what we're doing in the industry right now?
Fractional HR is like the missing part that many companies don't have. They don't have either the bandwidth or the ability to have an HR person in-house. And even when they do, it's also, I can bring in support as well. But we kind of fill in the blanks, or we're there to give them guidance. So from the blank side of perspective, I run HR for companies basically from the onboarding to offboarding and everything in between, while keeping them legally compliant and giving them guidance and support, whether it's comp structures or whether it's just overall policies. And then for those larger companies, I might be a sounding board for their HR team, help give them guidance and support, especially those companies that are growing into other areas, maybe even different states, to provide them with that guidance and support to give them compliance and legalities in those states that they may be moving in. So just supporting them in any of which facet as possible.
So a lot of you I know are struggling, and whether it's hiring, whether it's figuring out what to pay these people, whether it's creating a culture, benefits, all these different things, part of our mission is partnering with private practices to unlock greater function. And so in that, what Scott and I are trying to do is we're trying to build a team that supports you directly, whether you need help with refining your compliance, your handbook, your policies, your procedures, getting buy-in from your team, restructuring the way that your employees are held accountable, or all the way through benefit administration, termination, all these different things. And so we've got an excellent program, and we do this great discovery call. And so before I jump into this episode, I just challenge you, if you have always questioned, how do I get to that next gear? We've helped a lot of practices go from literally 30 employees to 100 employees. And sometimes it's a matter of you're a department of 5 employees and you just need someone in your corner for 5 to 10 hours a month. We start as small as literally 5 hours a month of support. So reach out, but let's dive right into the point of today. So Scott, one of the things I'm seeing, and I think you are as well, is that people only think of human resources as the police. And they don't recognize the systems, the culture, and really kind of the ingredients that get mixed together as a result of HR. And so what would you say is one of the number one HR mistakes you're seeing in private practices right now that are costing thousands of dollars or more?
Yeah, I think there's several that I see, but one of the big ones is definitely, bad hires. We always have those because I think people rush to hire someone because they just feel like they need to fill the void if they lost someone and fill those patient caseload. And sometimes what happens when we do a rush to hire, it leads to overpaying or maybe giving promises that isn't aligned with what you're trying to do, so maybe a lower caseload. So I see that as one of the biggest costs to most companies right now, is just the fear of losing out on someone and then having upset families, or upset patients. That's something that I see is very critical. And then also just the other one too, Brandon, is just not knowing the basic complexities of the laws. Like, can you do termination? Do you have the proper documentation in place? Whether it's also salaried versus hourly, exempt, non-exempt employees. Those are some of the bigger mistakes as well too. But really, I think it all starts with really vetting the right people, making sure that they're aligned with your culture and they're someone that you want to work with, and just being transparent with them, I think will help reduce a lot of the liabilities and risks to companies.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I think the other thing that I just want to kind of frame for this group from a framing standpoint, I believe the number one asset that HR can bring you is putting in structure for accountability. A lot of the times we hire based on what we hope versus hiring based on holding people accountable. How many times have you hired someone and they promised the moon and then you're stuck with them and you don't know where to go? And so if we create that infrastructure of accountability, my belief system is we're setting everyone up for success. And Scott, I mean, you get to kind of comment in this podcast from two different perspectives. One,
Yeah.
obviously, as chief HR, partnering with me, seeing what we're doing, all the stuff, but then also as an employee of mine and seeing, obviously, I'm not perfect, the good, the bad, the ugly. I'm here to share with you. I've not been perfect. I never want anyone to think I am perfect. I think my intention is to be the best I can. And so a lot of you have the right intention, but you're not focusing in on others' intention and how you set them up for success. And so as we look at things, one of the big accountability measures that I find in today's private practice is our employee handbook. And
Yeah.
a lot of these practices are taking cookie cutter approaches to their employee handbook. They're going out, they're getting the software, and they're just doing what legally is required. And so, how do you strategize? What do you recommend for private practices that need to understand what they should be crafting in the handbook versus what is a, we'll say, legal compliance approach to employee handbooks?
No, and I mean, sometimes people overlook the handbook. They just want to quick fix it. Like they may chat GPT it or they may do something along those lines, but not all handbooks apply the exact same way. So what I love to do, and with what also is great with anyone that comes on board and works with our company, is that we provide a service called Mineral. And Mineral is a learning management system, that software company that actually helps us create handbooks. But the best thing about them is they're written by lawyers. So anytime that you present a handbook, you want to either have it written by employment lawyers or reviewed by employment lawyer, because there's so many little intricacies in there that you have to have required by federal law. And then you have your state law requirements in there too. And, depending on your state, they could be changing laws, language 2, 3, 4 times a year even. So with Mineral, it automatically provides those updates. So when I work with a client, or even with our own company, we'll get in there, we get our handbook set up, we go through all the steps, we want to define it, like basically, give your tone to it, like what's your policies, what your procedures, but also making sure that all the requirements are legally in there as well too. And what's great about Mineral, they'll tell you what is required by law, what's best practice, and what is optional. And when we go through that, I feel confident when I provide a handbook to a company, that is in compliance with all federal and state laws. The other piece with the handbooks, that's those companies that are in multi-state locations, is that they need to make sure that they have the state laws for each location. So let's say you're in New York and New Jersey. You need to have your federal handbook, which is the first part, and then you need to make sure you have the New York state version and then the New Jersey state version within that federal handbook. So think of it having two handbooks. You have your New York handbook that has federal and New York law, and then you have your New Jersey one that has federal and New Jersey law. So those are some things that I see that it can become, that's been an issue for some employers just because they thought that their handbook would cover everyone, even if it's in different states. Even in states that are less regulations, they all have their specialties. Texas is the one that has a couple special laws that many states don't have. So we just need to make sure that we are covering all of our employees.
Well, and it's interesting that you bring this up because where I've seen HR compliance go awry recently is with telehealth employees. So I'm
Yeah,
seeing more and more practices are taking on employees from other states. And they're like, well, they're licensed in my state. They're providing therapy to someone who's local to where we are, but they reside in Texas, Florida, wherever. And then they don't recognize that they don't have an employee handbook that is really supporting that employee's labor requirements.
right.
But here's the other thing. They're not getting workers' comp for the employees that reside outside of the state that they operate in. And so they're already out of compliance. And so often we lose sight on um, where the patient is and the responsibility of location of patient versus the responsibility of where the employee actually resides. And even when we start to see employees who say, hey, I'm going to be going international and I want to work from there for 3, 6 weeks, there's other governing requirements. And so this
Yeah,
is why HR matters. Any feedback on that,
exactly.
Scott, in terms of navigating that side of things?
Yeah, I mean, it's critical to make sure. I mean, we saw a lot of this happen with, when COVID came around, everyone was working from home, and some people actually moved, and a lot of people moved to areas that may be more financially beneficial for them. And things fell through the cracks, and you start realizing like, well, wait a minute, what does it matter? Well, the workers' comp is the biggest one, and people ask me like, well, they don't have an office. What do we do? I mean, where would their workers' comp location be? Well, it would be the home office. That would you use their physical address, and that's something that many people do not realize. They think that just because they're employee that they're covered under our company. No, workers' comp's based on a state, and there's times where I had to work with benefit brokers because your workers' comp might be, let's say, in Massachusetts, but your employee moved to Washington. Well, that plan doesn't cover Washington, and nor does that company cover Washington. So we're going to have to get a separate workers' comp policy with a different company to make sure your employees covered. So prior to any time that, a lot of times, Brandon, people say, well, I'd like to keep this employee. They're very good. And I'm all for that. I'm all for retention. But the first thing we have to say is like, let's look at the state. Let's look at the different in laws and regulations, and then let's get a quote from our workers' comp provider to see if we can get that under our umbrella as well too.
Yeah. The other thing that I'm finding more and more with our policies, our agreements, all of these things that we outline for employees is we often have contradictory information because what we want from someone is different than what the law requires. And I find that often with this at will employment. We've got this circumstance where we're saying your employment's at will at any time. You can leave, I can fire you, whatever. And then we're putting in our agreements that we want 6 weeks notice. We want this, we want that. And I kind of feel like we have to, you gotta pick the chicken or the egg at a certain point. And so recently, I even had someone where I do ask for 6 weeks notice and we are an at-will employee. I ask for 6 weeks employment. But when someone's not working out, if I'm asking them for 6 weeks, I want to give them the same benefit of the doubt unless it's at cause. And so how do you navigate with your policies when something like an at-will agreement kind of contradicts what you're trying to get in terms of commitment from someone?
Yeah, the word at will it's really designed to probably favor the employee more than the employer. So even if like employers will come to me and then say, "Look, we're an at will state." Well, 49 states out of 50 are at will. The only at will state that's not is Montana. So we're all pretty much in an at will state. But that doesn't mean you can just fire anyone just for the heck of it. So you always want to make sure you have the documentation in place, and you want to make sure that you are following proper steps because you don't want to put yourself at risk as an employer. Now, from the employee's perspective, they can come in and give you a 2-day notice. Well, they're legally allowed to do that. You can't hold them. You can't hold their payback or anything like that because they didn't give you the 6-week notice, 4-week notice, whatever that may be. So it's kind of like we hope that they understand the importance of what we do and why we ask for the notice. So many of us work with patients, right? So we want to make sure that we have patient continuity. However, if an employee comes in and they gives you notice and they say they're going to give you a 2 week notice, there's nothing legally a company can do. The only thing you can do is basically state that if someone reaches out to you about employment in the future, and if they ask you if they're rehireable, the answer could be no. That's your decision as a company. You are allowed to say no. I wouldn't get into much more details than that because then it could become slander and it's not worth your time or energy. But but you can state that. At the same time, if an employee gives you 2 weeks notice and you're like, you know what, you can leave today. Well, if you do that, you should continue paying them through their 2 week notice. Why? And I know that may not make sense, but it's the safest and best practice. An employee who gives 2 weeks notice and if you fire them immediately has the right to file unemployment. And depending on your state and depending on who's overseeing this, can approve unemployment. Now, I realize unemployment is a small cost. Now, but it is something that you want to do right. So if you're asking for a 6 week notice and an employee is providing that, you should honor that, and you should probably, I would recommend paying that out or having them work through the 6 weeks. That's ideal. But if you get to the point where they're just, they're bringing too much toxicity into the environment, or they're just not doing their job, then you want to look at exiting them earlier, paying them out through their notice. If for some reason you do not want them to stay longer and they don't want to stay longer, then you can come to an agreement, and that's fine too.
Yeah. Yeah. So really understanding, and one of the things we talk about is they have the right to give you no notice, basically, and say, I'm gone. From a legal standpoint, we can. That doesn't stop us, though, from putting in accountability to say, hey, you are signing in addition to this that you will give us at least 12 weeks notice to ensure that there's not abandonment of care. And this is why. And failure to do this, you agree for me to report your licensure as you agreed to give me this notice, and you're forfeiting that right now. And therefore, it could be ethics. Any issues if I have additional agreements that they sign related to things like abandonment of care, et cetera.
No, I think you'd want to have that in place, Brandon, for sure, and it has to be reasonable. Like if you're asking for 6 weeks, I mean, 12 weeks is very extensive, right? If you're asking for 6 weeks and there's not a legitimate reason, look, we understand, that sometimes health issues come up. People may need to move to take care of a family member, whatever that may be. We'd look at a leave at that point. But if it's just truly to leave your company and there's like, you know what, Friday's my last day and it's Tuesday, that they need to understand that there is risk involved with that. And by outlining that and being transparent, and we want to be transparent even in the offer letter and an employment agreement, letting them know up front that this is what would happen if you don't give us the required notice, and that we could potentially report your license. That I do know that is something that is it will help with your employees actually you know abiding by your time frame. However, what I see, Brandon, is a lot of practices will say they'll do that, but they don't. And so you have to have that bite if you're having the bark. You need to have that statement that if you're going to do it, then you're going to have to do it. So it has to be a reason. But I agree, because at the end of the day, the people who lose, I know a lot of times employee thinks it's the company, and yeah, as a company we lose, but it's truly the patient. Because a lot of times we just can't plug and play them. We'll try our best, but there's times patients may go without services for months.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, I'll throw this out to you, and I know I'm throwing a couple curveballs today, but the other thing that I like to do is give them the clarification of when they are deemed non-rehirable. So under the following circumstances, you will be deemed non-rehirable. Is there any issue with us outlining that in a policy for them to understand when they are deemed non-rehirable?
No, there's no issue there. I mean, it's better to let them know up front, whether it's a HIPAA violation, lack of termination termination time if they tried to resign earlier, gross misconduct. Letting them know letting them know that up front is completely fine. I don't see many practices do that, and that's something that I think practices should start looking into, to having this thing outlined so that they're aligned and the employees align as well too with what the expectations are.
Well, and I bring that to everyone because when someone calls for employment verification, there's usually one question you can answer. And that question is, would you rehire them? And that's where helping your employees understand that if this question were asked in the future, you don't want me to say you're not rehireable for our organization. Now, it would take a lot for me to tell someone that, but it's still, again, the two different things I want you to think about from an accountability standpoint is someone being deemed rehireable and the role of abandonment of care and what we deem abandonment of care based on fair standards, fair and reasonable standards. So as we look to kind of wrap up this episode, I'm going to end with one last question for you, Scott. The one thing we haven't really covered in kind of our employee policies, procedures, accountability is job descriptions. And I'm just curious, is there anything that you find most practices are missing from their job descriptions, or anything that you think our listeners should kind of be aware of as they craft job descriptions?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry to share, but like most job descriptions aren't good that I see. So we have to do a lot of rewriting on those, which is completely fine. But job descriptions typically are too vague, or they cover everything from, the janitor towards the therapist and everything in between. It's like, well, that's not realistic. The one thing that or a couple things I would want to make sure that it's always mentioned in a job description is the phrase "all other duties assigned by management," and it could be by management, by ownership, whatever that verbiage is. But you want to make sure of that, because the employees will hold that against you, like, "Oh, well, that's not in my job description." Well, yeah, it is. I have this catch-all phrase. But the other thing is that actually sometimes people write their job description as what they would want to see in a model employee. Now, from a therapist standpoint, yeah, you need to have your licensure. But from an administrative standpoint, do they really need a master's degree to do this job, to schedule and all that? So it has to be realistic. It has to be what we deem overall reasonable and respond, for the position. So I would say that is a big piece that is something that we look at totally. And then the other issue that I see often is that the fact that they don't have all the physical requirements for the job. That is one of the biggest pieces that I see, is that you don't go into the discussion on, do you need to hear, do you need to see, do you need to have all this, and a lot of people don't think about that, but that is a requirement that you need to have in there because of the ADA requirements. If someone comes to you, applies to your position, says, look, I'm deaf, but it doesn't mean that I can't do the job, and your job description doesn't require me to be able to hear. And that is something, of course, as a therapist, 9 times out of 10, if not even way higher than that, that you need that requirement, So those are the things I see in job descriptions that are missing.
So even that component of, one of our businesses we do is home health. We go into
Yeah.
patients' homes. We don't actually put you need to have a driver's license. We put you must have reliable
No,
transportation. So
exactly.
transportation can be Ubers, it can be whatever you want. And recently I had an employee that got her driver's license taken away. And she said, well, I'm going to have my husband drive me from patient to patient. I'm like, okay, that's reliable transportation. So
Yeah.
these are all things we want to consider when we're kind of looking at the details of job descriptions.
Exactly. Exactly. So you're right, Brandon. It's like, is the driver's license actually required? No, it's not. But a licensure for your OTPT and species. So you have to look at that again. What is the requirements to get the job done, and what is your wish list? You have to determine those.
And I get asked all the time, like, Brandon, what should I do? This employee, I've had some weird things where it's like, well, the employee, I don't like what she wears to the clinic,
Yeah.
as an example. And I'm like, well, what's your dress code? And they have this vague dress code. So when you're thinking about this episode, I want you to think
Right.
about, we need to specify the exact expectations in order to hold others accountable. And so
Yeah.
I thank you, Scott, for being part of this episode. Don't worry, friends. Scott will be on plenty of more episodes. But if you want to learn more about fractional HR, if you want to learn more about how we can kind of partner with your practice to be an extension of your HR department, reach out. You can literally go on our website, wellnessworksmp.com. You can email info@wellnessworksmp.com, and we will coordinate that discovery call. Don't forget, together we can thrive, not just survive. Thanks for tuning into the Private Practice Survival Guide podcast. Don't forget to like us, subscribe, write a review, and share with your friends. Thank you for tuning in to the Private Practice Survival Guide podcast. I'm incredibly grateful to each and every one of you. Exciting news. We're now available everywhere, from Spotify to Apple Podcasts to YouTube or anywhere you like to listen to your podcasts. So watch, listen, and reach out. If you love this episode, please drop a 5-star review. It truly means the world to me. Are you looking for more ways to elevate your practice? If so, now is your chance. Reach out, go to my website, or email me at brandon@wellnessworksmp.com. And remember, it's not just about surviving, it's about thriving.